All right, welcome back. The time is now 3 p.m. Eastern. How are we feeling today? Let's see some noise in the chat. Hang in there, everybody. We have a couple of very, very exciting sessions coming right up. So, like I said, welcome back. I want to do a quick pulse check, though, with everyone. So, I asked this very philosophical question before we went to break. Why are we talking about cybersecurity, here in 2021, and especially with transit? So just using the chat really quickly, as concise as possible, why is it important for transit agencies to think about cybersecurity? What do you think? What did we come to during our short little walk? If you walked, some of us stayed still, but we walked mentally. All right, we'll give the chat some time to catch up. It took me a while to realize that the chat is way slower than what we think. All right, so Jacqueline says threats and vulnerabilities. Elizabeth, every industry is vulnerable. Okay, we're starting to see that V word, vulnerable. Yep, it could affect an RTD's operations, interruption of service, increased threat could shut down systems. We got to be ready. Yep, technology is the future. So, and as these responses are coming in, I want to use that as a great way to transition over to our speakers from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. And if you've ever wondered what CISA was all about or what guidance and resources CISA has available to assist transportation systems, here's the time to learn some. And hopefully this will be a very enlightening session. So now I'd like to introduce our three panelists, Ben Gilbert, Tony Militano, and Chris Hild, who are going to walk us through a very fascinating and multifaceted discussion. And please remember that if you have any questions, you can submit those at any time. You can submit those at any time through the Q&A button. So Ben, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Rodney and Roderick, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ben Gilbert. I'm a cybersecurity advisor with the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as Dr. Ramsey had mentioned. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a quick stab at that, answering that question. Why is cybersecurity important to the transportation sector and transit agencies? So from my perspective, cyber attacks and those threat actors that are out there have targeted all sorts of critical infrastructure, and that critical infrastructure and the cyber attacks carry with it the ability to now impact operations, which can include lives at stake, particularly in the transportation sector. And so it's incredibly important, not just from your IT and IT security staff, but really everybody in the organization to pay attention and focus on cybersecurity. So that said, I got about 15 minutes and I've already wasted about 2 minutes. So I'm going to drive through this as quickly as I can. There is a lot of information on it. So if you don't mind, and let me advance to the next slide. So the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is the, for those who are not familiar, this is the newest federal agency in the federal government. The former president signed off on the CISA 2018 Act, which formed us as the newest agency under the Department of Homeland Security. Our mission at CISA is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to our nation's critical infrastructure. While working to defend our critical infrastructure against various threats that we face today, while also working with all levels of government, private sector, and academia to help to safeguard and secure our critical infrastructure against the threats of tomorrow. Hence our motto down there at the lower left-hand side, defend today, secure tomorrow. And because we are so intently focused on risk mitigation, we often coin ourselves as the nation's risk advisor. Next slide. So I generally don't like to jump into kind of the boxology and organizational structure, but since we're here with our federal partners, I think and because we're such a new agency, it might be worth kind of digging into this just to kind of help build an understanding of where me and my other colleagues, Tony and Chris, kind of fall within the organization and the organizational construct. So when CISA 2018 Act was signed into law, it formed 3 executive divisions. Those divisions are in the middle right there, going across: the Cybersecurity Division, the Infrastructure Security Division, and the Emergency Communications Division. Now, in order to carry out our mission as the nation's risk advisor, 3 additional cross-cutting divisions were formed. And starting from the bottom up, the National Risk Management Center, which was actually formed just prior to CISA 2018 Act being signed into law, and what they are also called the NRMC. They are responsible for assessing and analyzing our national risk levels based on the 55 national critical functions. The Stakeholder Engagement Division, which is in the middle there, they are responsible for collaboration across other federal departments and agencies, as well as national associations and consortia. So they are, really the cross-cutting agency that helps to engage CISA at a national level with other national level organizations and agencies across the country. And then finally, we have the Integrated Operations Division at the top left there, which contains all of CISA's regional operations, also to including CISA Central and Watch Floor operations, as well as CISA Intel operations. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, CISA has a regional presence across the country. And we have 10 different regions, which we've actually modeled after how FEMA has structured its regions. And so we've aligned to those same regions. Now, each region has a number of administrative and support staff, and also a number of operational staff to include cybersecurity advisors, protective security advisors, emergency communications coordinators, as well as chemical security inspectors. As I mentioned earlier, I'm one of those cybersecurity advisors. I'm one of actually 50 across the country, and one of now 5 in this region, in Region 3. And as one of those cybersecurity advisors, I'm one of those operational staff that essentially serve as a boots on the ground, face-to-face touch point to CISA, and act in an advisory capacity to many of those public and private sector critical infrastructure organizations, and have reached back to CISA headquarters and all of the other resources that we could bring to bear to ultimately increase cybersecurity capabilities and cybersecurity posture of those organizations, and ultimately that across our nation. Next slide. So, among other things that we have, CISA has a number of no-cost cybersecurity services. Now, I'm not going to dig into each of these individually, because frankly, I can take an hour or more alone on just the capabilities and services that we can provide, all of which are no cost, by the way, too. This includes a number of different assessments, 10 different cybersecurity assessments, number of different training and awareness programs that we have to offer, as well as we have a CISA exercises team, and that offers a number of playbooks, planning, scenario building, and a number of tabletop exercises to include tabletop in a box, a number of different information sharing and informational products and services that are also available on our website. CISA also, at the 100,000 level, has a response assistance capability. Now, because we're talking with a federal organization here, we work very closely with federal departments and agencies, and kind of have an ability to mandate a lot of those other federal departments and agencies through emergency directives and binding operational directives. But we also have a response capability that's out there, in response assistance capability that's out there, to include our threat hunt team. That's more or less our premier incident response flyweight team that could respond to cybersecurity incidents, and even in really exigent circumstances, even deploy out on site to help that organization, particularly federal departments and agencies, recover from those cybersecurity incidents. And obviously, and Antonio, Chris will probably speak more to this, but particularly in the threat intelligence and information sharing arena, as well as we have a 24/7 malware analysis lab where we can work and provide that in-depth analysis on those cybersecurity threats and those variants that are out there that we see. And then lastly, obviously, cybersecurity advisors, myself included, being one of those that are out there. And among other things, we provide that incident response coordination to other organizations. So if they are dealing with a cyber incident and looking for a place to turn to help to pull in some resources, we could help with that coordination. We also offer a number, again, we conduct and also even connect those organizations to a number of the different cybersecurity assessments that we have to offer. We conduct a number of workshops, as well as public and private partnership development through working groups, industry consortia, and so forth that's out there. Next slide. So one of the things that as cybersecurity advisors, we're basically purveyors and advocates for is the Cybersecurity Framework. Hopefully a lot of you have heard of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. This is actually a partnership that was built out of, I'd say about 8 years ago, that got driven out of Executive Order 13636, which stands for, or it is the executive order for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. As a result of that executive order, NIST was charged with in collaboration with, at the time, DHS National Protections and Programs Directorate. That's the predecessor to CISA. They were charged with developing the cybersecurity framework in concert with public and private sector stakeholders that are out there. That was into February 2013, and in April of 2018, they actually revised and released a updated version of that, version 1.1, which actually includes the supply chain risk management aspect to it. So next slide. So what is the cybersecurity framework? Well, this is basically a common language and understanding that any organization out there can adopt to understand and address cybersecurity risk. And it provides a risk-based approach towards this and risk-based guidelines. Again, it was a collaborative effort, not just between CISA and NIST, but also the public and private sector partners that were out there. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework, it's not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to be informative. And in fact, it's broken out in 3 primary components. The framework core, which is essentially this big box that you see with this big table that you see in the middle there. That framework core includes 5 different functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And each function has a number of categories and subcategories, and those subcategories align to a number of different informative references out there to include a number of different NIST standards, ISO standards, ITIL standards as well, that are out there that align to that. So this is meant to be all-inclusive and risk-based and risk-informed. Another one of the primary components of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is what we call implementation tiers. Those tiers structured in 4 different tiers: so partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. So what that means is that it helps organizations to understand where they currently are and where they ultimately want to get to in that maturity, in the maturity of those implementation tiers. And then finally, the risk profiles, which are basically help the organization identify where they currently are and where they aspire to ultimately be. What we represent is the current state profile and the target profile. And being able to identify the delta or the difference between the two helps you to identify gaps in that current capability and allows any organization to understand how they can advance their cybersecurity risk management programs. Next slide. So one of the tools that CISA has to offer, and it's a no-cost, downloadable self-assessment, doesn't do scanning, but it is freely available to anybody out there, and it's actually open source and available up on GitHub, is the Cybersecurity Evaluations tool. This is one of the oldest tools that CISA has when it comes to helping to understand an organization's cybersecurity posture. Self-assessment, downloadable tool. It allows organizations to assess against a particular standard or set of standards that are out there. And more recent updates have included the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So as an organization, you could actually assess your organization against the NIST Cybersecurity Framework by utilizing this tool. The most recent version, which is version 10.3 that just got released this past summer, also has included with it other maturity models to include the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, that the Department of Defense is really driving their contractors toward, and also includes the Ransomware Readiness Assessment, which is actually a part of there and allows organizations to assess themselves and assess their maturity on how prepared they are for potential ransomware attack. Next slide. So as I mentioned early on, and I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to dig through all of these, but just to kind of give you an understanding of the different cybersecurity assessments CISA has to offer. As I mentioned earlier, we have now 10, well, actually, when we're talking with our federal partners, even more, upwards of about 13 or 14 different cybersecurity assessments. But primarily, these are the 10 different cybersecurity assessments that we promote that's out there. They range from very strategic and tactical and technical levels, from the 10,000-foot view, focusing more on risk management and process and practice and maturity and repeatability of those practices in an organization, from a non-technical approach. That, the top there, the cyber resilience review, focus really more on that strategic level, all the way down to lower, more technical assessments, such as the cyber hygiene series, which includes vulnerability scanning, which is basically weekly scanning of your outward-facing IP address space. And we provide weekly reports, similar to, if you're in the industry, similar to NESIS scans that are out there. So we provide a number of different weekly reports on the various vulnerabilities that we've identified and being scanned on that public-facing IP address space. And we rank those vulnerabilities in terms of criticality, how critical they are in terms of that vulnerability. And we provide those weekly updates to those organizations all the way down, and then to the lowest level, most technical assessments, the risk and vulnerability assessment, which is basically a 2-week pen test, 1 week off-site and 1 week on-site. And we offer that as part of to our federal partners out there, as part of a package of what we call the high value asset, or HVA assessments that are out there. Next slide. And so finally, just to wrap things up, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And this CISA is responsible for leading the Stop, Think, Connect campaign, which also includes Cybersecurity Awareness Month campaigns. And it's held every October, and it's been done so for about 18 years now, believe it or not. The Cybersecurity Awareness Month is a collaborative effort between government and industry, reaching all the way up from the White House, all the way down to individuals and also K-12 schools and universities. And it's all about raising awareness of the importance of cybersecurity and seeking to ensure that everyone has resources they need to be safer and more secure online. Now, every year we have a new theme, and this year the 2021 campaign theme is "Do Your Part." #BeCybersmart. And the hashtag on this slide should be at the top there, the hashtag #BeCyberSmart. I wasn't the one who created the slide, but that is the motto and the theme of this year for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Do your part, hashtag #BeCyberSmart. And even throughout every week, there is kind of a mini theme to that. Last week was fighting the phish. Week 3, this week is celebrating Cybersecurity Career Awareness Week and helping to educate those folks who strive to be in the cybersecurity arena and strive to advance their cybersecurity careers or get into the space. Really helping educate and raise awareness of this weekend, Career Awareness Week, into that. And then next week, it's all about putting cybersecurity first, with examining how we do that today, and what we do today affects the future of cybersecurity and our personal and consumer and business cybersecurity that's out there. Next slide. And just to kind of wrap things up again, this is just a quick snippet of the number of different no-cost services and resources that CISA has that's out there. I know this is a fire hose of information, and honestly, I could have spent another hour or two just honestly on this slide alone. There's a number of different resources and capabilities out there. I would strongly encourage everyone to come visit our website at CISA.gov to find more information out about these. That said, there's my contact information there. I know we got Q&A at the end here, but right now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Tony Militano to talk a bit more in depth, from his perspective on what he'll be providing. Tony?
Yep, I am here. I see a CISA logo, but I don't see my particulars. There we go. All right, real quick. So hello, everybody. I'm glad you guys can be here. My name is Tony Militano. As already stated, the first portion of this brief will be presented by me, and will focus specifically on cyber threats most likely encountered within the rail subsector. I'll be immediately followed by Chris Hild. And where I am picking up the threat piece, he's picking up the vulnerability piece associated with mass transit. This brief that we put together as part of what we called a transportation sprint. It was a collaborative effort across 4 of the DHS partners. It was CISA, it was TSA, it was the Coast Guard, and the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, the Cyber Mission Center. Which was, again, is about as collaborative across the intelligence enterprise within DHS as you can get. Next slide, please. So if you take a look at the agenda here real quick, this is what we'll be going over in the next 15 minutes. Next slide, please. All right. Before we get started, I want to start with just kind of establishing a level set understanding of the threat environment and how we within CISA define threat. So in analytic terms, threat can be defined as intent plus capability plus opportunity. And as seen in the graphic here, you can see that intent is defined as the goal your adversary hopes to achieve. Capability is the means your adversary possesses, which are needed to successfully breach your organization and achieve their intended goals. And opportunity is your adversary's timing and knowledge of your environment, including its vulnerabilities. And a legitimate defined threat must consist of all 3 of these pieces. Without one of these pieces, it's simply a potential threat. And then along with threat, we talk about mitigation. So threat mitigation for us is threat minus opportunity. So opportunity is that piece that you can control. It's the easiest of the 3. You can, put your resources towards, control them, thus disallowing a threat to become actualized. And next slide, please. So the transportation sector. Now, again, we did this from a transportation perspective, a holistic transportation perspective, realizing that there are subsectors within to include mass transit. So the transportation sector is a critical part of the global economy. It enables the movement of people and products. It's a vital link in the supply chain, supporting many industries. It's comprised of numerous subsectors, including but not limited to aviation, mass transit, freight rail, maritime. Right. Transportation sector is heavily reliant on cyber-enabled technology designed to ensure safety and efficiency of operations across its subsectors. In many cases, it utilizes a wide array of computer-based interconnected systems, such as air navigation systems, onboard aircraft control and communication systems, maritime-related GPS systems, positive train control systems, and security screening systems. These interconnected systems and the heavy dependence on technology create an optimal environment for the emergence of new and existing threats. TSA, they produce a quarterly roll-up of cyber incidents affecting surface and aviation-related transportation assets. During the first quarter of 2021, they highlighted 55 separate cyber attacks directed towards the transportation industry. Again, this is over a 90-day period. The most frequent tactic, technique, or procedure, or TTP, that was directed towards transportation networks was ransomware. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. They accounted for nearly 1/3 of all these attacks. All right, slide, please. Thank you. All right, so the threat actors and the threat in general terms, and we can go into, if we had the time, we could go very detailed into nation state advanced persistent threats and things of that nature. But for this particular presentation, we're going to restrict it to just general types of threats. All right, so cyber threat actors are not equal in terms of capability and sophistication. They have a wide range of resources, training, and support for their activities. They may operate on their own. They may operate as a part of a larger organization. For instance, a nation state intelligence program or organized crime group. Sometimes even sophisticated actors use less sophisticated and readily available tools and techniques because these can still be effective for a given task and make it difficult for defenders to attribute the activity. So the first general type of threat we're going to look at is nation states. Nation states are frequently the most sophisticated threat actors, dedicated resources and personnel, and extensive planning coordination. Some nation states have operational relationships with private sector entities and organized criminals. Nation states such as China are believed to place a strong emphasis on building out China's rail transportation industry in order to meet state goals outlined in various strategic plans. Things you may hear about are the Belt Road Initiative, the Made in China 2025 program, and there's others as well. Nation states continue to map U.S. critical infrastructure sectors for strategic advantage, deterrence, and escalation operations, and have likely conducted numerous cyber espionage campaigns within the sector, focusing on transportation-related technology, supporting its industrial, economic, and military development, and large-scale data collection for intelligence purposes. Another general type of threat actor we encounter are hacktivists. These are typically at the low level sophistication. They often rely on widely available tools that require little technical skills to deploy. And their actions often do not have a lasting effect on their target beyond reputation. What we see most, I'm not saying more often than not, but the more high visibility incidents come at the hands of cyber criminals who are generally understood to have moderate sophistication in comparison to nation states. Nonetheless, they still have planning and support functions in addition to specialized technical capabilities that affect many victims within the transportation sector. Cybercrime actors represent a high frequency and intensity threat to the transportation sector. And as with other transportation subsectors, we have increasingly observed attack or actors monetize access to compromise corporate networks and databases via access brokers. We assess with high confidence this trend will continue for at least the near to midterm. Ransomware, as I said earlier, ransomware is the lead type of attack against the transportation sector. While we're on the topic of it, real quick, I want to briefly discuss ransomware as a service. It may be something that you guys have heard about, and it's a business model. It's utilized by ransomware developers, in which the developers lease ransomware variants for use by those willing to pay the ransom, often called affiliates. So ransomware as a service provides those malicious cyber actors who possess limited technical skills, the tools to launch a ransomware campaign from which a percentage of the extortion is paid as a commission to the malware developers. The most common ransomware used against mass transit entities in recent years were NetFilm, NetWalker, REvil, and RansomX. And some of the non-ransomware attacks against rail companies include data breaches, compromise and the release of information, and DDoS attacks. Next slide, please. The cyber rail or the rail cyber landscape it's similar across all the rail industries, mass transit, passenger, freight rail systems. They remain a target for a range of malicious cyber actors seeking to take advantage of the rail subsector security vulnerability and extensive operational control networks. In addition to operational networks, the rail industry is also highly dependent on administrative data and networks needed for the tracking of shipments and utilization of business and logistical data. A cyber event such as a DDoS attack or ransomware infection could result in significant transit delays due to the inability to coordinate and track shipments. Rail system operators use a variety of cyber-dependent systems for controlling rail traffic. Some of these examples include positive train control systems, some of the switch positioning systems that are used, data voice communications, which are needed to, for the crew to authorize actions, wayside signal systems, and so on. Again, throughout 2020 and 2021, a variety of criminal and likely not nation-state actors targeted U.S. transportation entities in the rail subsector using all manner of tactics. Again, ransomware was the number one tactic used. Slide, please. So TSA, again, this was a collaborative effort with TSA. TSA produced an assessment in which they focused on the likelihood of cyber espionage being conducted and the likelihood of an actual an attack that would result in catastrophic failure of a system. So within that assessment, they stated that TSA assesses the nation-state cyber espionage threat level for mass transit, passenger rail, and freight rail modes is high. We have moderate confidence for our judgments concerning NTPR and freight rail modes because we have received less consistent reporting concerning activity against those modes than we do against the aviation and pipeline modes. TSA assesses the threat of a high level or catastrophic cyber attack from any actor to any U.S. transportation network is low because almost certainly no actor has both the capability and the intent, again, going back to that definition of threat, to carry out such an attack in the current geopolitical climate. However, Russia and China very likely will attempt to use cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure, including transportation, during a crisis or conflict. Additionally, the geopolitical environment is subject to rapid change. We have moderate confidence in this judgment based on the following factors. First, no high level or catastrophic cyber attack has occurred against U.S. transportation. Some nation states almost certainly possess and are almost certainly increasing cyber attack capabilities against U.S. transportation networks. Russia and China almost certainly currently possess the capability to launch cyber attacks that cause localized, temporarily disruptive effects on critical infrastructure, including transportation in the United States. And although some nation states have a cyber attack capability, we assume they lack the intent to carry out such an attack in the current geopolitical environment. Terrorists, pro-terrorist hackers, and hacktivists likely have only a low-level cyber attack capability. The report goes on to say that nation states may decide to conduct low-level disruptive cyber attacks because the risk of U.S. retaliation for this type of attack is lower. Furthermore, we cannot discount the possibility that U.S. transportation-related entities will be affected as part of a large-scale cyber attack involving multiple localities or targets in the same manner as numerous industries were affected by the 2017 WannaCry, NotPetya, and Bad Rabbit cyber attacks. All right, and then finally, addressing this last slide, some of the more high-level 2020 to 21 cyber threat activity that we're aware of. In terms of cyber espionage, in April 2021, malicious cyber actors with ties to Chinese government compromised 3 of 18 computer systems used by the New York City Metropolitan Transit Authority, according to media reporting. And although the cyber actors did not compromise the OT network that controls the train cars, network defenders were concerned that the cyber attacks may have established a backdoor on the network to allow persistent access, enabling future attacks. To gain access to the MTA, the hackers took advantage of vulnerabilities in Pulse Connect Secure, a widely used connectivity tool that offers workers remote access to the employer's networks. The cyber espionage campaign involved two groups of Chinese hackers, one of which was likely operating on behalf of the Chinese government. This is according to FireEye, a cybersecurity firm. The ultimate goal of this intrusion is unknown, but it's part of a broad campaign attributed to Chinese government in July of 2021, and it was designated Hafnium by the Microsoft Corporation. So again, that's cyber espionage. Some of the ransomware attacks we've seen since January 2020, an unnamed ransomware variant was used to target the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, or SEPTA. The attack resulted in the agency shutting down its real-time bus and rail information for 2 weeks. The agency claimed no customer-related data was affected, but employee network access was impacted into at least October 2020. The Metro Vancouver Transportation Agency TransLink confirmed that an egregor ransomware operators breached its networks in December 2020, and also accessed and potentially stole employees' banking and social security information. TransLink announced that the transportation network is experiencing issues with their computer systems following a cyber attack, and the IT issues impacted the company's phones and online services, as well as the customer's ability to pay for fares with a credit card or debit card. So again, those are just a couple of highlighted incidents. We don't believe that ransomware is going to stop anywhere soon. CISA does provide, as has been said, some of the services are geared specifically towards ransomware. And next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Chris, we do have our contact information on here. If there's something that you would like, a brief you would like to receive, by all means, reach out to us. And again, this was the threat piece. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Chris Hild, and Chris will go over the vulnerability piece.
Thanks, Tony. Before we get started here, my name is Chris Hild. I work within the Cybersecurity Division of CISA and our Vulnerability Management Subdivision. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the vulnerabilities that we've seen based on information that we gather through some of the services that Ben mentioned earlier. When we talk about cybersecurity risk, just as Tony mentioned with threat, we're talking about three different pillars here with risk. First, we have the threat. So we have to have an intentional and capable threat actor willing to try and compromise us. Then we have our vulnerability, which, as Tony mentioned, is the opportunity for the threat actor to compromise us. And then we also have the impact. So that's kind of what goes up into making cybersecurity risk when we're talking about it in this context. Next slide, please. So what we were able to do within my team here is look at some of the data that we've collected from our cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning service over the last 10 months or so, from October 1st of 2020 to July 31st of 2021. So what we are able to do is when different entities within the sector enroll in any of these services, we're able to aggregate and use that anonymized data at a high level to provide some trending analysis based on what we've seen. So in this case, we had 33 transportation security system sector entities enrolled in our services and providing us with data. So we are able to look at the IT attack surface. That's the internet accessible attack surface. In this report and study that we've done, we're not looking at operational technology. So even though this is a small sample of the larger critical infrastructure sector for transportation, the problems and vulnerabilities that we see are pretty common. And so we just suggest that you look into them a little bit further and apply them as applicable to your specific organization. Next slide, please. Looking at the sample population a little bit more closely, you can see it's broken up. We had a lot of mass transit and aviation entities enrolled. We also had 11 entities participate in our remote penetration tests, which are a little bit more in depth. Our assessment teams go out and try and mimic what a threat actor may do, their techniques and procedures in order to compromise an entity. Whereas our vulnerability scanning service, which makes up most of our findings here, that is your kind of automated vulnerability scanning and assessment tool that we use. And you can sign up for these services for free as well at no cost to you. Next slide, please. Some of the key findings that we have here. So we want to focus on our exposed risky services. We saw almost 55% of the entities enrolled exposing what we consider to be risky services that were exposed to the internet. So in this case, those are services that can provide threat actors with initial access to your network, as well as opportunities for command and control and data exfiltration to send anything that they are able to find and take back to their point of origin. We also were looking at unsupported operating systems. So about, again, 49% of entities were running unsupported Windows operating systems. What this leaves us vulnerable to is we're not getting the most updated security patches when we have outdated software or operating systems running on our networks. So it allows threat actors, again, the opportunity for exploitation. Spear phishing weaknesses. This comes from our remote penetration tests. About, again, 55% of the entities were found to be able to be bypassed by our remote penetration testing teams through spear phishing emails. So that's either they were able to bypass the technical controls and get the email to a actual person at the entity that they were trying to phish, as well as the users at that entity clicking and opening the email, which would then deliver a malicious payload. We did have some positive news from the study as well. We saw active vulnerabilities per entity decreasing by about 40% over the 10 months that we were able to look at. So this means that the entities are actively engaged in trying to reduce their attack surface and their overall cyber risk. Next slide, please. Some of the prevalent vulnerabilities that we found. So we looked at here, we have 8 out of the 11 that we've highlighted here for critical and high severity vulnerabilities that were prevalent across the sector were due to use of weak legacy systems and deprecated protocols. Again, here as well, about 49% were using deprecated versions of SSL version 2 and 3. So we just suggest, as possible, try and update those protocols, those operating systems, so that way you're using those versions that have the latest security updates and that are going to be stronger against a threat actor to kind of deter them from attacking your network. Again, 4 out of the 11 vulnerabilities that we've mentioned here have what we consider to be known exploits. So that's an exploit that's available that you can find on the dark web or online, just more generally. That makes it easier for various types of threat actors, like Tony mentioned, anywhere from somebody who's not very sophisticated to somebody who is sophisticated to attack your network. What we want to do is get those remediated as quickly as possible, so that way we harden our systems as much as we can, so that way we reduce the risk from those less sophisticated threat actors just kind of seizing an opportunity and exploiting a network. Next slide, please. A little bit more here on vulnerabilities with known exploits. At some point during the 10 months, about 18% of entities were operating with a critical vulnerability that has a known exploit. When we just talk about critical vulnerabilities, those are based on the CVSS scale. And so what that means is those vulnerabilities that are critical and high likely have the greatest impact if they are compromised to your network. So we suggest kind of prioritizing in terms of critical and high, and then within those 2 buckets, try and take care of those that have known exploits, so that way we harden our networks as much as possible. But we do also still need to pay attention to vulnerabilities at the medium and low level, because we have seen threat actors chain vulnerabilities together and kind of be able to cause more damage and find more information that way as well. Next slide, please. So again, we just want to highlight here I know Tony talked about ransomware a lot. We've seen that remote desktop protocol, which is one of those risky services that we look for here, that is a common attack vector in ransomware cases. So if sometimes we've also gone to this virtual environment where we need to use more virtual tools. Sometimes RDP and some of these other services are necessary for business operations. We just ask that you closely evaluate whether or not you need to have those exposed to the internet. If not, we suggest that you kind of pull them down. If you do need them, we ask that you monitor them as closely as possible for any unfamiliar activity, and harden them and put compensating controls around them to try and reduce your risk as much as possible. Next slide, please. Again, we are looking for Windows unsupported operating systems as well. In this case, this could signal to us a larger issue if there are Windows operating systems running. That may also mean that there's other applications and software that are out of date being run by an entity. Over the 10-month span here, we do see a good decrease among entities using Windows operating systems that are end of service. So we just want to see that trend continue downward in the future as well. Next slide, please. As we mentioned earlier, phishing is also another common attack vector for the ransomware in particular. So ransomware payloads get delivered a lot of the times through phishing emails. So look into your phishing defenses, whether that's training your workforce to recognize it or implementing stronger technical controls to sort of filter and block those emails from even getting to the end user. Next slide, please. Vulnerability remediation. So CISA requires for federal agencies to remediate critical vulnerabilities within 15 days or less, and 30 days for high vulnerabilities. Those are sort of benchmarks that we use as well and suggest to other sectors, although they are not held responsible to those targets. The longer that you have a vulnerability open for, the greater the opportunity or chance there is that for a threat actor to take advantage of it. So that's why we are always trying to move to remediate critical and high vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. One way we look at remediation performance is looking at median days to remediate. So this can be a positive and negative indicator of remediation performance. It's positive in the sense that if you have a high remediation number of days to remediate, that means you've gone back and taken old vulnerabilities that have persisted for a while on your system and you've remediated them. It's also bad because that means they've been persisting on your network for a really long time and possibly provided threat actors with a long opportunity to exploit them. Next slide, please. The vulnerability backlog. So as we mentioned earlier, we saw about a 40% reduction among the average number of active vulnerabilities per entity that we were able to look at. That means entities are remediating more vulnerabilities than are being disclosed or they're identifying each month. So we want to see that trend continue. I know sometimes it gets difficult, resource-wise. A lot of vulnerabilities come in and you got to figure out which one to remediate first. So we just kind of track that to make sure that that's going in a good direction. Next slide, please. Lastly, some recommendations for kind of how we can deal with some of these issues that we've noted. Defend against ransomware. There's a whole website now for defendagainstransomware.gov that you can look at for resources. CISA.gov also has more. And then as well, as we've talked a little bit about here, we want to focus on improving our phishing defenses, improving our patch management times, and securing potentially risky services. Next slide, please. And as Ben covered in his portion as well, there are a lot of CISA services that can be made available to you at no cost. These are the ones related to vulnerabilities and scanning and assessments and findings. And we saw within the first 3 months of signing up, new entities were able to reduce their number of vulnerabilities by about 22%. So next slide. And if you have any feedback or questions or would like to get in touch with our cyber hygiene services team, that information is here for you as well. And thank you guys for the opportunity. I'll hand it back to Robert.
All right, thank you, Chris. So we have time for a very short Q&A. That was a really, really informative session that you all led. So the first question that we have here is that increasingly there is more public or RTA provided Wi-Fi capabilities accessible to customers. Coincidental to that are more components on vehicles that use Wi-Fi, such as real-time arrivals and departures, customer transit updates, and ticketing. So the question is, how does the agency assess this growing trend? And that could be thrown for anyone in your team.
Chris or Tony, did you want to take a quick stab at this? I got my own thought, but I'm curious if you guys are maybe a little closer to this than I am.
So can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we're probably in line here thinking, but anytime you add, you know, whether it's a web-facing piece of gear, whether it's a car, whatever it is, you're increasing your attack surface, right? So that's that's where the threat actors are going to look. But yeah, to do what we can do to decrease that attack surface, always good. But Ben?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so, you know, ultimately, yeah, Tony, you're you know, spot on that I was kind of thinking. It's ultimately increasing the attack surface. You know, when we're talking, you know, vehicles, and not just vehicles, but, you know, all of what we call the Internet of Things, right? You know, from, you know, phones, even your, you know, heck, for refrigerator or coffee machines, medical equipment that's out there. All of this is kind of, you know, a part of this, you know, I guess, segment of IT systems and equipment out there that we call the Internet of Things. That's becoming a much more prevalent. And, you know, CISA is definitely interested in kind of assessing this, not just from, you know, just a risk-based approach and what NRMC is doing. But I know, and Chris might be able to even speak to this too, some of the assessments we offer, you know, I guess focus more specifically on the industrial control systems aspect. Things like validated architectural design reviews, which, you know, while it's traditionally ICS and OT focused, you know, probably have, you know, can be used in aspects such as this, right? And there's a nexus there between your OT, your IoT, and traditional IT environments that are out there. So yes, we are looking at that. We throw a number of advisories out there, you know, even one, I think, late last week, specific to, you know, water utilities that were out there, and the focus on, you know, some of the threat actors targeting water utilities out there with their, you know, industrial control systems and OT. But, you know, IoT is a part of that too, to include maybe some of the vehicles that you know, are utilized that's out there.
All right.
Yeah, I can chime in too as well. So as Ben and Tony were mentioning, you know, we need to be intentional, right, as we think about bringing these new technologies online. So, you know, they could introduce new vulnerabilities that threat actors can take advantage of, or, you know, because we're not even thinking about the interconnections that they're going to start creating here between, you know, physical and cyber connections as well. So we would advocate kind of a security by design concept and be intentional when thinking about bringing the latest cool new technology online, whether it's, you know, Wi-Fi in a car or a real-time sort of device. You know, what data is it collecting? what could happen if it is compromised, who's providing it to you, all those different sorts of things that we have to start evaluating when we kind of enter this world that's kind of blending these two ideas together.
All right, thank you for that, your response. And just since we're talking transit really quickly, for all of our attendees, this could sound like a really useful thing to consider when you think about safety management systems, in particular safety hazard identification. I just wanted to drop that as I was listening to the our presenters today. That may be something to consider. All right, and our final question that we have time for right now, very straightforward. Do you have strike back capabilities? And when you respond to that question, could you please just briefly define what a strike back capability is, and then just give us a concise answer, please?
So I guess I'll
answer.
I defer to Ben.
I'll put it this way, that this is really not in CISA's lane. This is, I would speak, where CISA is focused, as I mentioned, on risk reduction and, ultimately buying down the risks, to our nation's critical infrastructure. When we're talking about strike back capabilities, we're talking about outward facing, outward from the country. That's not in CISA's lane, probably more appropriately in DoD's lane. So I certainly can't speak to what capabilities they would bring. And I don't know if, Chris or Tony, you would have anything else to add on that.
Yeah, probably not in this forum. A lot of that resides in the classified realm. So I know that's a that's a kind of an easy out, but it is true. Chris?
Okay. All right, and thank you for that. And if there are any other questions that participants will like to submit, we can provide those later on through the transcript. Okay, we have one more question, actually. So given the wide range of entities covered by CISA, excuse me, how many of the 33 TS cyber hygiene assessment participants were transit agencies? And if we don't have that answer right now, that's perfectly okay. We can provide that later.
I cannot get into specific numbers just for anonymity reasons, but in the sample that we had, I would like to highlight there were no freight and rail agencies enrolled at this time. So if you are interested in enrolling, please do. It would help us out a bit to understand that more. And as well as highway and motor carrier, we had no participants. So if you are involved in either of those two areas, we would appreciate more signups. It helps you and it helps us as well because we have better data to look at.
All right, well said. Well, to that point, thank you all for such a really, really great and enlightening discussion. For our attendees, could you give them a very, warm virtual thank you as we've done all day?